was 23, I started renting out the basement apartment in my parents' house. It was mostly to save money, but also to finally have some privacy. Even though my parents would often go away for weekends, I always felt like I had no space of my own, like I couldn't even have friends or girlfriends over in peace. The basement apartment was separated from the upstairs by a lockable door at the stairway. It had an open layout with a small kitchen connected to the living room. Down the hallway were my bedroom, bathroom, and laundry room. There was also a side entrance through the living room, which I used most of the time. This happened one weekend in the spring of 2015 when my parents were away. Since I had the place to myself, I invited my two friends, Michael and Ryan, over to hang out. We sat on a couch, blasting music, watching a hockey game, drinking, and just having fun. I wouldn't say I got drunk, but I definitely had a strong buzz going by the end of the night. Since my parents weren't home, I kept the door between the basement and upstairs unlocked, just for convenience. I stored most of the drinks in the fridge upstairs since it was bigger and easier to use. When the game ended, both of my friends decided to crash at my place for the night. The couch down there was massive. It could easily fit 3 people if you laid out the right way. So, after a long night, I said goodnight and went into my bedroom to sleep. I woke up a few hours later in the middle of the night. The house was silent, but then I heard footsteps upstairs. It was the sound that had woken me. Naturally, I assumed it was either Michael or Ryan going to grab water from my parents' fridge. I closed my eyes again, not really worried about it. But a few minutes later, I heard the sound of my bedroom doorknob twisting. Someone was trying to open it, but it was locked. I always locked my bedroom door. It was just a habit. I wondered why one of them would be trying to come in, but I was too tired to care. I figured if I stayed quiet, they would give up and go back to sleep. And that's exactly what happened. I drifted back off shortly after. The next morning, Michael was already gone, but Ryan was still asleep on the couch. When he finally got up, I asked him if he had tried to come into my room during the night. He said no, at least he didn't remember since he was pretty drunk. We laughed it off, went to a deli nearby for breakfast sandwiches and coffee, and then Ryan headed home. I didn't bother asking Michael about it. Honestly, I didn't care enough. That Saturday, I spent most of the day out with other friends, not getting home until late. I was sober by then, just exhausted. I grabbed a quick snack, washed up, and went straight to bed. I lay down, watched TV for about an hour, and then turned it off. The moment the TV went silent, I heard it again, creaks and thumps above me. It sounded like footsteps in the kitchen upstairs, almost the exact same as the night before. I sat up in bed, listening closely. The sound stopped after a while. My heart was beating a little faster, but I convinced myself it was probably just the house settling. I tried to relax, but then, once again, the doorknob to my bedroom began to turn. This time I shot up instantly, wide awake. The knob twisted for a couple of seconds, then stopped. A light knock followed. I froze, not saying a word. I reached for my phone on the bed and quickly texted my family, Michael and Ryan. Deep down, I knew it wasn't either of them, but I wanted to believe it was. No one replied. My parents were asleep, and they weren't supposed to be back until Monday. I didn't dare say, "Who's there?" Instead, I grabbed a blunt object from beside my dresser and hid in the corner of my room, ready for the worst. I stayed there for 10 minutes, heart pounding, but whoever it was didn't try again. Finally, I called 911, whispering quietly into the phone. I asked the operator to have the officers meet me at my bedroom window, since I didn't feel safe leaving my room. Minutes later, I heard a light tap at the window. An officer was outside. I handed him the spare key to the side door, and soon I heard them enter my apartment. Only then did I finally leave my room, meeting 2 officers who quickly searched the basement. There weren't many hiding spots down there, so it was quick. We then moved to the main floor. Nothing. Then upstairs. I guided them through each room, but when they entered my parents' bedroom, I suddenly heard yelling. One officer shouted for someone to come out. From the hallway, I peeked in and saw a man crawling out from under my parents' bed. My stomach dropped. The man looked filthy, disheveled, wearing an old sweatshirt and shorts. He looked either homeless, mentally unstable, or both. The officers pulled him out, cuffed him, and brought him downstairs. When they asked if I knew him, I said absolutely not. The look he gave me as he walked past was chilling, full of hate. Once he was taken away, I felt relief wash over me. The police told me that if I or my parents wanted to press charges, we'd need to follow up with the precinct. But because nothing was stolen, and since the man appeared to be homeless, my parents decided not to. The scariest part is this. I realized I might have left the front door unlocked that Friday night when Michael and Ryan came over. With the music blasting, I never would have noticed someone slipping inside. Or even worse, the thought that chills me the most. Maybe he had already been inside the house for much longer, hiding, waiting. I've always enjoyed the quiet life. In 2016, I moved into a cabin deep in the forests of Vermont, far away from the chaos of the city. The place was big and secluded, surrounded by endless woods that stretched for miles. My nearest neighbor was at least 3 miles away, and the only sounds I usually heard were the wind through the trees and the occasional bird call in the distance. It was peaceful, and that's exactly how I liked it. Fishing had always been my escape, and I spent most of my free time on the lake behind my cabin. It was the perfect place to forget the world. At night, I often sat on the large deck overlooking the trees, a cold beer in my hand, watching the sun disappear beyond the horizon while listening to the sounds of the forest. For years, it was peaceful. Until recently. It all started one night about 2 weeks ago. I was sitting on the deck like always when I heard something unusual, the snap of a twig out in the woods. I brushed it off, thinking it was probably a deer or maybe a raccoon. The forest is alive at night, and I had gotten used to little noises like that. But over the next few nights, I noticed the sounds were becoming more frequent. At first, it was small things, like the crunch of leaves or twigs breaking. But then, one night, I heard something different, a scratching noise. It came from the side of the house, right near the window of the guest bedroom. It was faint, almost like whatever it was didn't want to be heard. I stood up, my heart beating faster than usual. I waited for it to continue, but eventually it stopped. I convinced myself it had to be a squirrel or maybe a branch brushing against the siding. Still, I didn't feel right. That night, I went inside and locked every door and window. The following evening, the scratching came again. This time it was louder and closer. It sounded like it was right outside the spare bedroom window. I froze in place, listening intently as unease settled into my stomach. Something about it didn't feel natural. I finally pulled the curtain back just a little, peering into the darkness. Moonlight lit the trees, their shadows stretching long across the yard. The wind was still. Nothing moved. No animal, no person, just silence. I shut the curtain, telling myself it was nothing, but deep down I knew better. The scratching didn't stop over the next few nights. Sometimes it was scratching, sometimes light tapping, as if someone were gently knocking on the glass. One night, I even thought I heard faint whispers coming from the walls. I told myself it was my imagination, but the more it happened, the harder it became to ignore. Finally, I decided to confront it. Maybe it really was just some critter. I grabbed a crowbar from the shed, thinking it would be smart to have something with me in case things went wrong. I walked into the guest bedroom and carefully opened the door. The air felt stale, like no one had been in there for months. I swept my flashlight across the room, checking the corners, under the bed, behind the dresser. Nothing. I felt ridiculous standing there, ready for a fight, with nothing but an empty room staring back at me. But then, I noticed something. The closet door was slightly open. I never left it like that. My stomach turned. Slowly I walked over and pulled it open, shining my flashlight inside. There was nothing in the closet, except for a small piece of dark, torn fabric caught on the wall at the back. It looked like clothing. I froze, staring at it, my mind spinning. Was someone in my house? Had they been here already? My breathing grew heavy, and I backed out of the room. I slammed the door shut and locked it from the outside before stepping onto the deck to clear my head. But the fresh air didn't help. The woods felt different, heavier, as if the dark itself was pressing in on me. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. That night, I slept on the couch with a baseball bat beside me. Strangely, the house was quiet, almost unnaturally quiet. The next night, I told myself I wouldn't be chased out of my own bedroom. I lay in bed, determined to ignore whatever came. But just as I was about to fall asleep, I heard it again, tap, 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 against the glass. I jumped up and grabbed my flashlight. I stormed to the guest bedroom, yanked open the curtains, and froze. This time, I didn't see empty woods. I saw a figure. Someone was standing right outside the window, a shadow, tall and unmoving, staring in at me through the glass. My blood ran cold. I stumbled back, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might stop. I turned away, my mind racing. Who was that? What did they want? I bolted into the hallway and grabbed the phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. I called 911 and whispered into the receiver that someone was outside my house, and that I thought they were still there. The operator told me help was on the way. I hung up and looked around. I needed to get out. I couldn't stay another second. I grabbed my jacket, but before I could leave, I heard it. A slow, deliberate creak from the hallway. Someone was inside the house. I didn't hesitate. I sprinted to the back door, flung it open, and ran straight into the woods. Branches whipped against my face as I pushed through the trees, running harder than I ever had in my life. My lungs burned, My legs screamed, but I didn't stop until I reached the edge of my property. Through the trees, I saw flashing red and blue lights. The police had arrived. I crouched behind a tree, trembling as I watched the officers storm into my cabin with their weapons drawn. I couldn't stay to see what they found. I didn't want to. Later, I called the police station to confirm I was safe, so they wouldn't think I was missing. But I never went back to that cabin. It still sits there, empty and waiting in the woods. And every time I close my eyes, I still hear it, the scratching, the tapping. I don't know who was in my house. I don't know what they wanted. But I do know one thing. Whoever they were waiting for me. And they're still out there. This happened back in 2009, when I was 16 years old. My parents had gone out for the night to a casino event, leaving me home alone with our family dog, Max. It was around 11 p.m., and I was upstairs on my computer, chatting with friends on Instant Messenger and watching videos online. While I was typing away, I suddenly heard Max barking from the living room. At first, I assumed it might have been my parents coming home early, so I didn't pay much attention. But after about a minute of non-stop barking and no sound of the front door opening, I finally got up to check. When I walked into the living room, I saw Max facing the front windows, barking aggressively at something outside. The windows looked out onto our driveway. I pressed my face close to the glass, but the outside lights were off, and it was pitch black. I could barely see anything except for my mom's car parked in the driveway. Since there was only one car there, I knew my parents hadn't returned yet. I figured maybe Max had just heard a neighbor's car door shutting or a loud vehicle passing on the main road. That kind of noise was common, even late at night. I went back upstairs and continued messaging my friends, but over the next few minutes, I kept getting this eerie feeling that I was hearing noises outside, near the house. Every time, Max would start barking again, sometimes even growling. I was about to get up and calm him down when I suddenly heard what sounded like a knock at the living room door. Or maybe it was more like a rustling sound against it. My heart skipped a beat. I got up and slowly went back into the living room. I stared out through the windows again, but this time there was nothing. The driveway was empty. The yard was dark. I felt too scared to look directly through the peephole. I didn't want to risk seeing some strange face staring back at me. Instead, I checked the lock on the front door to make sure it was secure. I was about to head back upstairs when I nearly jumped out of my skin. There was a sudden knock at the side door of the house. This time, my heart was racing. Was it my parents locked out? Was it a stranger? Or worse, was someone trying to break in? Before I could even process those thoughts, I heard another noise. The unmistakable sound of a doorknob being jiggled. But it wasn't coming from the front or side door. It was coming from the basement entrance. That entrance was hidden underneath our deck in the backyard. To even know about it, you'd have to already be familiar with our house, or be very determined to find a way inside. Max went wild. He bolted down the stairs, growling and barking in a way I'd never heard before. He was usually a sweet, calm Labrador, but at that moment, he sounded absolutely vicious. The noise at the basement door grew louder, like someone was trying to force it open. Then, suddenly, it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. I stood frozen in the living room, unable to breathe, waiting for something else to happen. Then, Max started barking even more frantically. His paws thundered against the basement steps as he lunged at whatever was down there. I realized in that moment that whoever it was had probably managed to open the basement door and get inside. Fear finally overtook me. I screamed for Max to come back upstairs. The second he did, I slammed the interior basement door shut and locked it. Then, I grabbed the house phone. We didn't all have cell phones back then, and ran with Max into my parents' bedroom. In the closet, my dad kept a gun stored. I armed myself, hiding there with Max pressed up against me, still trembling from the chaos. I was ready to call 911 when, all of a sudden, the front door opened. Max bolted out before I could stop him. I was seconds from pulling the trigger at whoever walked in. But then I heard my parents' voices. They were home. Relieved but shaken, I ran out to see them standing in the living room, petting Max, looking at me with confusion as I tried to explain what just happened. My mom was horrified, and my dad, furious, grabbed his gun and searched the house inside and out. He found nothing. Still, I couldn't sleep that entire night. The next afternoon, there was a knock at the door. My heart jumped into my throat all over again. My dad opened it, and standing there was my Uncle Richard. He was holding an envelope. Richard had always been unsettling. He wasn't openly criminal or violent, but his presence made everyone uncomfortable. He had a strange way of talking to people, and I always felt uneasy around him. Even my parents admitted he gave them bad vibes. I stayed hidden in the other room while my mom and I eavesdropped on the conversation. Richard said something like, "I tried stopping by last night to drop this off, but nobody was home." My dad's face twisted with anger. He slammed the door shut a moment later and came back inside, shaking with rage. He told us Richard had been the one outside the house the night before, stomping around, knocking on doors, even trying to get into the basement. Inside the envelope was a card. I opened it to find a gift card tucked inside, thanking me for helping his daughter, my cousin, with softball practice. A gift card. That was his excuse for creeping around our house at nearly midnight. The thought of it made my stomach turn. He never called the house to see if we were home. He never waited until a normal hour. He just skulked around in the middle of the night, trying different entrances like a burglar. My dad told him never to come around again. After that day, we never spent much time with him anymore. Even now, all these years later, I still think about it. What would have happened if Max hadn't been there to scare him off? What was Richard planning to do if he had gotten inside before my parents came home? The questions still haunt me, and to this day, I will always be grateful for Max, because in that moment, he wasn't just a pet. He was my protector.